to today's webinar called 92% of tenants are only searching online for the next rental property. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. You can obviously hear us speaking and you can see my slides on your computer screen, but we can't hear you. So it's just important to make you aware of how this webinar works. Those of you that don't know me, I've been a landlord for the last 16 years or so. Got properties in northwest London and in Swansea, and it was off the back of being a landlord that I wanted to set up UPAD a few years ago. And the key rationale for me was at the time I was using high street agents, and I just found they weren't acting in my best interests. What I mean by that is something like 90% of all tenants would rather meet the landlord on a viewing, and also the tenant fees that most high street agents charge, irrespective of how much they are a real turn-off from a tenant's perspective. I've also got my own tenancy agreement and so on, and I just thought there had to be a better way of advertising my properties and managing my portfolio. In the last 12 months, UPAD has let just over 22,000 properties. The most interesting thing for me is the amount of inquiries we receive from tenants, and the 1/3 inquiries we've had in the last 12 months gives us huge insights into tenant behaviour in terms of how they're looking for their next rental property, etc., etc. And that's the rationale why we are doing this webinar. So in the next 30 minutes or so, what we want to cover off is the following. How to set the right rental price for your rental, understanding the marketplace that you are operating in, who you're competing with, how to create the perfect property ad, and what we mean by this is the fact that 92% of all tenants are now looking online for the next rental, so it's really important to make sure yours stands out over all other properties that are being advertised online. And how to maximise the amount of inquiries you receive. It's obviously important to have your property advertised online, but how do you make it stand out compared to all others? And we'll share some top tips in order to facilitate that. And finally, we'll talk about how to choose the perfect tenant for your property. You may well have 3 or 4 people wanting to move in and pay the asking price, but how do you pick the ideal tenant? And we will cover that off at the end. But going back to the beginning, the first thing that I think is important before you advertise your rental property is to understand what rent you should be charging. And rather than just assuming the same rent as what you charged in your last tenancy, or adding a bit because you think rents have gone up in your area over the last 12 months or 24 months, I think there's a bit more that we could be doing. And I think it's really important to understand the marketplace that you operate in, rather than just assuming that it stayed flat or indeed that rents have gone up a bit. And one of the easiest ways of keeping yourself informed of what's happening in your locality is to create a property alert on sites like Rightmove or Zoopla. And this is how you set one up. If you go to the Rightmove website, for example, and you do a search under the rental tab at the top, what you can do is do a search for the postcode or the area that your property is in, and you'll see that drop-down box that appears in the middle of the screen where you can save that search. And you put your email address in, and as and when properties that come up that match your search criteria, i.e. the same postcode or area that your rental property is in, you will receive emails into your inbox similar to what you can see in front of you. And what this allows you to do is a few things when you are looking to set the rental price for your next property. It will give you a steer about how competitive your landscape is, whether there's 1 or 24 different properties in that search criteria. And clearly, the more properties there are, the more you need to do to make your property stand out over all others, because it will be that list of tenancy when they're looking for their next rental. Also, it's worth looking at how other properties are being presented. Have they got really good photography? Have they just been refurbished? What are the lead photographs, that main photographs that people are seeing before it becomes available? Where does it appear in the search results? There may be 3 or 4 pages of search results, and a bit like Google, we should all aim to get our property on the top of that first page of results. And I think finally, what's happening to rental prices, if you have set up this alert maybe 3 months or 6 months before your property comes on the market, when your tenants give you notice or they are moving out at the end of the fixed term, what it will allow you to do is to understand over the previous few months what's been happening to rental prices in your particular locality and your type of property, rather than just relying on what it was last time round, or indeed what's been happening nationally. Clearly on a local level, and also your type of property will be different to what's happening nationally. And the whole rationale here for getting these alerts through is to allow us as landlords to understand what we need to do to make our property stand out at the time that we put it on the market before we actually do, so we're not wasting some crucial time there. I've got a key statistic that's worth sharing with you, and that is that UPAD, we receive just over a third of all tenant inquiries in the first 48 hours a property is being advertised. And therefore, getting it right first time is really, really important, because by the time you change the price or add photographs, for example, you're sort of missing a trick there, because you'd have missed a huge quantity of leads that would have come through from people that are potentially interested in renting your property. So getting it right first time round is really important in terms of price. But what I would also say is that pricing is probably less important in today's market than it ever used to be. And this is because of how Rightmove and Zoopla, which are property portals, how their search functionality now works. It used to be the case where the most expensive property in a price range would appear at the top of the list and the cheapest would appear at the bottom. But now the portals have changed their way results are shown, so that those properties that have just been added to the market appear at the top of the list, and those that have been on for 40 or 50 days, for example, will appear on third or fourth page of results. And therefore, it's very important to create that perfect property listing when you put it on the market, because if you were to add photographs or change the description or change the rent after a couple of days, there's a huge quantity of inquiries that you would have missed. And just to show you what I mean by this is in the top right-hand corner where I've circled, you can see that on Rightmove, the menu there defaults to showing the most recently advertised at the top of the list. You can change it to show the most expensive or the cheapest, but it defaults to show the most recently advertised. And according to Rightmove, something like 95% of all tenants aren't even aware that you can change the order, or those that do know about it don't change the order. So it's really important to get it right first time round because of the way property are now showing results on Rightmove and Zoopla. Creating standout is really important, and I'll give you two examples from my own personal circumstances. If I had a property that I was looking to rent out, and maybe my tenants had given me quite a bit of notice, a couple of months, I might put it on the market at a bit of a cheeky rent, knowing that 3 weeks, 4 weeks before they move out, I can bring the price down. And whilst that may have been okay a year or so ago, if I was to do that today, what it means is by the time I change that price, it will be appearing on the second or third page of results, and the amount of eyeballs that will be seeing that property are going to be dramatically less than those that see it when it's at the top of that first page of results. The other thing I used to do, if I was renovating a property, is as soon as the builders were getting close to finishing, is I would want to get it on Rightmove and Zoopla so that I minimised any void periods I had with my property. But if I was to do that now, where I don't have the photographs taken or a floor plan done, because I'm waiting for the carpet to go down and the property to be cleaned up, I'm again missing a trick, because of the fact that a third of all inquiries come within the first 48 hours that a property has been advertised. So it's really important to wait until it's really ready to be photographed and go on the market, because the idea of changing the price or adding your photographs after a few days means you're going to be missing out on a huge quantity of inquiries. I hope what I've just said all makes sense. It's therefore really important to get it right first time round. We don't really have a chance now to amend, because by the time we do that, it's on the second, third, fourth page of results and getting far less amount of eyeballs seeing our rental properties. I thought it was worthwhile, while we're just running through Rightmove and Zoopla, just to talk about how tenants are looking for the next rental, because when we're advertising our property, I think it's really important we understand what our customers, our tenants, are doing when they're looking for their next rental. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, 92% of all tenants are now searching online for their next rental. So it's really important to get your property online, which is where tenants are looking. And this chart shows where tenants are looking for their next rental. Clearly, Rightmove and Zoopla are the market leaders. So just over half of all inquiries come through from those two sites. Gumtree is a bit of a love-hate site. It's a bit like Marmite. Some people are fans of it, some people aren't. I think it sort of had its day, as it were, where the functionality for looking for a rental property and the amount of spamming that goes in from other agents inquiring rather than actual tenants means I'm not really a fan of it anymore. And the long tail is made up of about 1,000 different websites that UPAD will feed your property onto, where collectively they do make up quite a huge proportion of the leads. But that is where tenants are looking, and it's important to get your property, in particular on Rightmove and Zoopla, because of the quantity of leads that are coming through from there. And I just wanted to drill down a bit further on that. It's all very good getting your property on Rightmove and Zoopla, but it's also worth being aware that over 50%, it's about 56% now, of all tenants are looking through the Rightmove and Zoopla apps on their phone and iPads for the next rental. And this is important twofold. The first is the growth rate of people looking through these devices. At UPAD, we've seen a threefold increase in the last 12 months. But also the resolution on our phones and iPads is so much more than what it used to be when we advertised in traditional media. So traditional newspapers, like the Manchester Evening News as an example, the screen quality on our iPads is something like 500 times greater. And therefore, when we have photographs of our property, it's really important to use high-res images, ideally done on a digital camera, rather than just using your mobile, for example, because of how the screen quality of iPads and phones have increased quite dramatically. And the other thing I'm just going to mention to do with photographs is how results are shown through the Rightmove and Zoopla app. And I've got here just a screen grab from my phone of a search I did near the UPAD office. And as you can see here, when you do a search for a particular locality, particular price range, the majority of the screen is taken up with images. Something like 95% of the screen is all about the photograph of the property. And so there's this thing that I've created called the swipe effect. And what I mean by this is that if you don't have photographs, or they're very grainy or inferior, tenants are just simply going to swipe through them and move to the next one on the list because they can't see what your property is all about. So having photographs is really important, and I'll come back to them later on because they are really important. The presentation of your property has a really big bearing on the amount of inquiries that you will receive. And the other thing I wanted to touch on is how tenants are looking. Clearly there's been this big shift to using mobile iPads and phones to look for the next rental, and this has also meant that there's a big growth in the amount of tenants looking outside of office hours for their next rental. At UPAD, nearly 40% of all inquiries we receive come outside of normal office hours, so evenings and weekends, for example. And it's probably worth, when you're advertising a property, before you choose an agent, to mystery shop them and see whether they're open outside of 9 to 5 and how quickly they reply to tenant inquiries. Because if they are only operating from 9 to 5, or indeed they take quite a long time to go back to tenants to say, would you like to organise a viewing for this property, you're going to miss out on those leads because those tenants the next day or in a couple of hours may be in a meeting or doing something different. And so it's really important to be using an agent that replies speedily to inquiries and operates as much as possible outside of your traditional 9 to 5 because of how tenant behaviour has changed quite dramatically. One of the things at UPAD that we put into play very early on was to react to the fact of when tenants are looking for the next rental. And so whether tenants are calling UPAD or emailing through the Rightmove or Zoopla website, we reply back to those inquiries straight away. We answer the phone 24 hours a day because of the fact that tenants are increasingly looking outside of office hours and want this speedy response. It's something to consider when you're choosing an agent. It shouldn't just be about the fees. It should be how quickly they reply to inquiries about your property to minimize any void periods. So I mentioned earlier about how Rightmove and Zoopla operate and the fact that presentation is really crucial in order to let your property speedily. And so we did a test. We put on a property, it was a pretend property near the UPAD office. Everything about it was exactly the same, except we did it with and without images, just to see what effect it would have on this swipe effect I mentioned earlier, that without images, tenants are just going to swipe through to the next one on the list. And we put these properties up for a week just to see how many inquiries we got through. And the top one the one with images, got 8 times more inquiries purely because tenants can see what your place is about rather than just guesswork. And I think we're all in this era of time precious, cash rich, and therefore the more information about your property, in particular the images, will have a huge bearing on how many inquiries you get, and clearly there's a correlation between more inquiries equals a speedy let. So it's worth considering getting some really good photographs done for your property because it shows off your property compared to all others. It allows tenants to visualize what it's like, and it also reduces the swipe effect as well from tenants that can't see what your property is about. And there is this thing that, there's 1,000 words in an image. So the more they can visualize living in that property, the more likely they are to inquire. If you don't have a digital camera, or if you're unsure on how to use it, UPAD offer a photography service where we will get professional photographs done of your property, and it's the same price wherever your property is in the UK or whatever size it is. And that is £85 plus VAT. And you don't have to buy anything else with it if you don't want to. But I think because of how Rightmove and Zoopla now operate and what is motivating tenants to inquire about a rental property, having really good images is probably the single best investment you can make, and clearly you can use the same images again and again, so it's worthwhile getting some really good photos done of your property. Incidentally, I just wanted to mention about staging, creating that show home look. This was actually a property of mine that we just renovated near Marble Arch in London, and I got 2 lots of photos done with and without furniture in, and we went the whole hog in terms of dressing the bed, the dining room table was laid, towels in the bathroom, etc. And what we found was interesting is after a week we got 4 times more inquiries from the top property compared to the bottom one, and it just might be worth something to think about between this sort of furnished unfurnished route about dressing your property to maximize the amount of inquiries you get. I think there's 3 key elements I would mention. Clearly you can see here it generates more inquiries, which means you'll let it faster. There is a belief that a furnished property gets somewhere between 10 and 30% more inquiries than an unfurnished, 10 and 30% more rent than an unfurnished property, so it might be worth considering. And also, depending on who your market is, what type of tenants, if you're letting to young professionals, they are increasingly of the era where they have their electronics and clothes, but they don't really have any belongings. So it may be more appealing to them to offer a fully furnished, as well as maximising the rent and minimising void periods from your perspective. The other thing that goes really well with photography is having a floor plan, and it allows tenants to see what's actually inside the property, whether that 3rd bedroom really is a bedroom, where they can put a table and chairs in the kitchen, for example. And again, it's really something that will maximise tenant inquiries too. I think they're probably more useful for studios and HMOs than a 2-bed flat because the variance is far greater there. You can get one done online and do it yourself. I think having something is better than nothing at all, but if you'd like UPAD to do a floor plan for you, regardless of where your property is or how big it is, we will do a floor plan for £80 plus VAT. You can use it as many times as you like. It's not a thing you have to purchase every time you're advertising your property. But my belief is that because of how tenants are looking for the next rental and how Rightmove and Zoopla are serving results, having really good images in a floor plan is very much a necessity rather than a luxury in today's marketplace. And I think, finally, if you are in a competitive space, and what I mean by that is through the property alerts that you will set up for each of your properties that you've got, if you find that you're getting maybe 12 or more properties that are in the same locality as yours on the market, there may be a need to make yours stand out more than all of the others to create more eyeballs looking at it. And to explain what I mean here, this is how a normal property is advertised on Rightmove or Zoopla. You have one image and 4 or 5 lines of text. Generally there are 10 properties per page of results, each one listed after the other, and then another 10, etc. But if you're in a competitive space, i.e. there's more than 12 properties, so there's more than a page of results, it may be worth looking at how you can create your ad to look bigger and bolder and stand out more. And what you can see in front of you is what's called a premium listing. And here the whole ad is substantially bigger. there are more photographs of your property compared to just a single one for a normal listing, and the background is different. And so what it means when somebody's doing a search, yours is bigger and bolder and will therefore drive more eyeballs to it than the others in the list. Should you only be competing with 2 or 3 other properties, it's not something that is probably worth considering. But if there are more than 12, i.e. more than a page worth of results, it may be worth looking at doing something to make your ad stand out more than all others online, if there's quite a lot of choice from tenants to look at in that particular locality. A premium listing gets about 1/3 more inquiries because it drives people to your ad over all others. And one statistic here that might be worth looking at is, at the moment in the rental market, less than 1 in 10 properties is advertised as a premium listing. And so if you decide to advertise yours as a premium listing with only 10 properties per page of results, the likelihood is you're going to be the only one with the bigger and bolder ad online on that page of results than all others. And so it may be worth considering also because of the fact that most people aren't advertising it as such. If you want to advertise it like that, and I think it's really worthwhile if you're in a competitive space, we charge £75 plus VAT. If you haven't got many properties you're competing with and they're all on that first page, it's probably not an investment that is worthwhile, but something to consider if that isn't the case, especially if you're in busy areas, city centres in Leeds or Manchester or the Docklands area of London, for argument's sake. And I think finally we just wanted to run through how to choose the perfect tenants for your property, because it may be that you've had 6 or 7 viewings for your place, at which 3 people or 4 people have put an offer forward, maybe a couple for the asking price and one a bit below it all, slightly different start dates, and it can be quite hard to decide who you want to move in. And I think there's a couple of things to bear in mind. The first is to get a gut feel factor of who your new potential tenants are actually like. What I mean by that is to ask them some open-ended questions. There's whole webinars we do on questions you should ask on a viewing, how to conduct the perfect viewing, which you can find out more at from the UPAD homepage. But in essence, try and ask some open-ended questions like, what is your take-home pay? Have you lived with these other tenants previously? Why are you leaving the current property that you're in? Are you employed or are you a contractor? Are you still in your notice period, in your probationary period or not? Because the way tenants will answer this question will give you a really good steer on what they're actually like, whether they stutter or just come straight out with it. I think you can get a lot more of a gut feel factor from that than just from what you see when you are referencing your tenants. And based on the results people give you and the feedback, that will give you a steer on who you should potentially choose to move into your property, which may not be the person offering the highest rent, but it may be somebody that is going to be the good tenant who's going to look after your property, can easily afford it as well. And the other bit is to do your own viewings. There's a couple of reasons here. One is being able to ask these questions I've just mentioned and get the gut feel factor, but also something like 90% of all tenants would rather meet a landlord on a viewing rather than an agent. And so by doing so yourself, you're appealing to more and more tenants, and you're probably more likely to get better tenants out of the process as well. So there's a couple of big reasons, as far as I'm concerned, to conduct your own viewings rather than giving it to somebody else, because of what tenants want and being able to get that gut feel factor of who you should be choosing to move into your property. Again, don't feel you're obliged to take the person who's offering the highest rent or the first person. You want to find the best person to move into your property that's going to look after it and easily afford the rent. Which, what I might just throw in now is, when we say easily afford the rent, you want the rent you're charging to be no more, ideally, than 30% of your tenant's take-home pay. The second it starts going above 40% of their take-home pay, you're sort of getting into danger area in terms of affordability. So try and make sure it's at least 30% of their take-home pay. So just to summarize, before we do a few questions, understand the marketplace that you operate in by creating an alert on Rightmove or Zoopla. It will give you a really good steer for how competitive your space is, what rent you should be charging, and how you should be presenting your property online. It just gives you the sort of necessary due diligence to understand the market you're operating in before you physically put your ad up there. Be aware that Rightmove and Zoopla in particular have changed how they serve property results, and therefore getting it right first time is really important. When it's just gone on the market, it's when it's at the top of that first page of results, and as I mentioned at the beginning, just over a third of all our inquiries come within the first 48 hours, so getting it right first time round is really important. Be aware that tenants are increasingly using mobile devices and outside of office hours to look for the next rental. So how it looks on the Rightmove app or Zoopla app on their mobile is really important. And also choose an agent that is available ideally 24/7, because otherwise if it's just a 9 to 5 operation, you're going to be missing out on approximately 40% of all potential inquiries that come when your agent is shut, and it just goes through to voicemail. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the presentation, in particular photos and floor plans that will really maximise the amount of interest that you get from tenants. So it's really important to make sure it looks stunning as soon as you put it on the market. You can obviously use the same photos and floor plan and again, and it's probably the single best investment you can make when you are looking to advertise your property. And if you're in a competitive space, which I would classify as 12 or more properties that are in the same search criteria, it may be worth advertising it as a premium listing to drive more eyeballs to your property over all others. Again, it generates about a third more inquiries by doing so. And finally, we ended up talking about conducting your own viewings, mainly because most tenants would rather meet you and I on a viewing, and also to get that gut feel factor of what that tenant's really like. There's so much that can't be said within tenant referencing, and it's really important to get that, that gut feel factor. Thank you very much indeed for listening and giving up some of your valuable time. It's really appreciated. For those of you that haven't submitted a question yet, you can use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen to send any questions through to us, and we will try and answer as many as we can in the next sort of 10 minutes or so. So please use that chat box if you've got any questions that you want to send through to us, and I will try and answer as many as we possibly can. There's a few questions that have come through already. I will try and answer all of them if possible. Somebody's asked a question about creating a property alert and why that functionality is there. Now, it's a really good question. The reason a property alert was created by Rightmove and Zoopla was actually more for buyers and tenants to be kept informed of new properties as soon as they came on the market, and it allowed them not to have to sort of log in to Rightmove or Zoopla every single day, and just to be kept informed of what was happening in their locality. So they've actually got really great use for us as landlords to understand the marketplace that we're in, and for each property of mine I've created an alert so that once a week I just get an overview of what's coming on the market, how is it being presented, what's happening with rental prices. They weren't really designed for landlords, but I think they are really useful tools for us to advertise, to understand who we're competing with and what's happening in our particular locality. So they're really useful as far as that bit's concerned. Somebody else has asked a question about viewings and what are my thoughts as far as block viewings are concerned. I'm actually a really big fan of block viewings, and thank you for this question. It's a really good one. And the reason I'm a fan of block viewings is twofold. One is it cuts down on my wasted time of doing 4 or 5 viewings at each property. But also, and probably a bigger factor, is that if you're doing a block viewing from 5 till 6, apart from the fact most tenants don't necessarily always turn up exactly on time, it creates more demand for your property. If there's 4 or 5 people that turn up at the same time, those tenants are going to think this is more of a hot property, and they're more likely to make a decision speedily than wait a few days. So I'm a really big fan of doing block viewings. What I would add to that also is I would send a reminder to your potential tenants on the day or a couple of hours beforehand, just to remind them that you're doing a viewing at 6 o'clock or whenever it is. Make sure they've got your contact details and the full address of your property, so you keep it front of mind for them. And I find the reminders are really, really worthwhile as far as that bit's concerned. We've had quite a few questions about photography. I'll try and answer a couple of them. One question has been on what number of photographs should I take, and a couple on what type of photographs should I be taking of. So what I recommend, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier, so apologies, is I would lead with an internal shot of your property. And what I mean by that is have a photograph of the kitchen or the living room, the lounge, as your main photograph. So when somebody does that initial search in a particular postcode and particular price range, you want that first main photograph to be an internal shot of your property. Most tenants want to visualize what it's like to live in your property rather than see the outside. So I'm a big fan of leading with an internal shot. Try and have maybe at least one photograph for each main room of the property, and have somewhere between 8 and 12 photographs in total. You don't have to, I think you can put about 50 on if you want to. I think that's a little excessive, and it's probably more your summer photo album, but I think 8 to 12 will suffice as far as that is concerned. And hopefully that answers the questions as far as photography. There's been a couple of questions as far as viewings are concerned and how do I go back to tenants. So the way it works at UPAD is when a tenant inquires about a rental property, is we reply back to them straight away, whether they're calling us or filling out the inquiry form online, with the full address of the property and your contact details. If they've given us permission, we will share their contact details with you, so you could be proactive if you want to be, and you can call them up and be proactive, or some people think that tenants should be making the calls in the first place, but ultimately the call is yours about what you want to do with it all, but it will give you a steer for the amount of inquiries that you are coming through. What I do recommend is whether you are calling tenants yourself or they are contacting you, is to reply back to them speedily. If they are calling you or SMSing or emailing you, it's really important to reply back straight away when they're in that zone. I think there's a 30-minute or 1-hour zone when tenants are looking online, they just want to get maybe 3 or 4 viewings in their diary for the next couple of days. And it's really important to reply back speedily because you want your property to be one of those 3 or 4 that they are going to inquire about. If you reply the following day, for example, they may have already got 3 in their diary, don't need the need to get any more in, and you may have missed that opportunity. So it's really important to reply back speedily. What I would say from what I've heard from Rightmove is that every other high street agent in the UK replies the following day to these inquiries, which I find quite shocking because most people want to get a response straight away. The next day they've got their ones in their diary already, they may be in a meeting, they may be driving, and you sort of miss that opportunity. So it's really important to reply to those inquiries speedily, whether you're calling them up to be proactive or waiting for them to call you. Do reply back straight away to them. Don't sort of wait several hours or a couple of days, even if it is on the weekend. You'll find that really gives you the competitive edge over other agents that aren't acting speedily to things. We've had a question about Rightmove and can I advertise my property on there myself? At the moment you can't. I can't really see that changing either. To get on Rightmove you have to be an estate agent, whether that's an online agent like UPAD or a traditional agent off the high street, but it's only agents that can advertise on Rightmove and Zoopla. So it used to be the case as a landlord that you could either advertise yourself through sites like Gumtree or classified ads, or use a traditional high street agent to access sites like Rightmove or Zoopla on a let-only basis. But now sites like UPAD, you can advertise on Rightmove, Zoopla and various other websites for a fraction of what a traditional agent costs. But I think the more important thing for me is the functionality factor, where we reply speedily to inquiries, and the guys in the office here are available 8 to 8 during the week and 9 to 4 on the weekends. They're all ALA accredited, so if you get stuck with anything about what type of images you should use, they're here to help you with anything that you need to do. And I think finally, we've got time for one more question just on legislation, on what documentation do I need to provide to my tenants when I'm letting a property. So it's really important to be aware of this. It's a webinar we do in full, so it may be worth going to the UPAD homepage to register for these, but in essence, when you let a property now, there's various documents you've got to give to your tenants, and it might be worth grabbing a pen and paper or a computer to write these ones down. The first is obviously to have a signed copy of the tenancy agreement. Secondly, there is the CP12, the gas certificate that you've got to give to your tenants when they move into the property. And you've got to give a copy of it to them. You've got to ensure that the smoke alarm is working when they move into the property. And what might be worth doing is getting confirmation from your tenants, just them writing it down, that the smoke alarm was indeed working when they moved into the property, because should, in the unlikely event there be an issue, you've got something in writing to say your tenants confirmed that it was working when they moved in, or indeed if you're getting an inventory done, you can use your inventory clerk to confirm that as a third party. There is also a government booklet called the Rent Guideline Book, which you have to give a copy of to your tenants as well now, and also a copy of your EPC, the Electrical Performance Certificate, which is a legal obligation now to give to your tenants. And finally, if that wasn't enough, is obviously you have to do the right to rent checks, which is where you need to see their original ID, so passport or driving license, and match that up with the person that is looking to move into your property. You have to see the original documentation, but you can don't have to meet the tenants face-to-face. You can do that through FaceTime or Skype, or indeed face-to-face. But the original documentation you have to see in its original form, and also take a photocopy of it for your records. But in essence, that's the documentation as landlords we need to see when we are now letting a property. Without any of that, you could be invalidating issuing a Section 21 notice as an example, which is when you want to get possession back of your property at the end of the fixed term. Hopefully that was useful. I'm sorry I haven't been able to answer any more of the questions, but I'm sort of keen to try and keep this to time. I would like to thank you for joining in, and I hope it has been worthwhile. There are a whole load of other webinars that we cover off, from legislation to best practice and so on and so forth. So please keep your eyes and ears out for that, and maybe register for our weekly newsletter, which keeps you informed of what's happening in the rental market. If anybody's got any other questions or comments, please do reach out to us through the UPAD homepage, or on the phone number or email address you can see on your screen. But I would just like to say thank you very much indeed for tuning in, and I hope it's been worthwhile. I wish you a very good day. All the very best. Take care. Bye.